This is John Howell Essential Cuts, your daily rundown of the best from today's show on 890 WLS.
Today, President Biden signed a historic proclamation establishing the Emmett Till and Mamie Till Mobley Regional Monument, both here in Illinois, one here, the church where the funeral took place, and two sites in Mississippi. Emmett Till would have turned 82 years old today. He was abducted, tortured, and lynched in Mississippi back in 1955 at the age of 14. The president spoke today that, hey, unlike other people that do not want to face American history, this happened.
At a time when there are those who seek to ban books, bury history, we're making it clear, crystal clear.
All right, let's go to Nguyen, ABC News correspondent in D.C., who was on this story all day long. What's exactly involved in the monument designations?
Right. So these monuments will honor both Emmett and his mom, Mamie Till Mobley, across three sites in Illinois and Mississippi. And essentially, the president says these places are going to be protecting those pieces that are important to Emmett's story, which, as you probably know, ended with his white killer's acquittal and his mother's activism. And she famously left his casket open to show the world just how badly brutal attacked her son was. And that image really set off thousands of other activists. So we understand that Till's funeral service, Robert's Temple Church, that's going to be one of those sites. And then in Mississippi, the Grovel Landing will also become a monument. And people believe that's where Till's body was recovered. And the third location is going to be in the 2nd District Courthouse in Mississippi. That's where Till's killers were acquitted by an all-white jury.
Did those killers ever receive appropriate justice later?
So we understand, this happened around it was 1955 when this happened. That was when Till was abducted, tortured, and killed. He was just 14 years old. He was accused of whistling at a white woman in Mississippi. They were completely acquitted, but then they later did admit to the crime in a magazine. And since then, there was no justice in Till's murder. And the two men who were then admitting to this crime died from cancer.
And then also, I think the president mentioned this, but he paid tribute, at least a couple lines in his prepared remarks, to black media. In other words, Jet Magazine had the courage and the tenacity in that world to publish those photos, as gruesome as they were.
Yeah, absolutely. And these images that we had seen during that time were so important to Emmett's story, as his mom had said, because she wanted the world to know what exactly happened to her son. She had said at that time that she wanted everyone else to see what she was seeing. And that certainly set off this huge, of course, the civil rights movement, a big part of it. And the president pushed this idea that during that time, these black media agencies were able to show courage and actually publish the story and parts of it that were especially important. And, this actually comes at a very polarizing time in the U.S. over matters concerning race. Conservative leaders are pushing back against the teaching of slavery and black history in public schools. We had just heard from Vice President Kamala Harris in Florida, where just last week, the State Board of Education actually approved a new set of standards that included teaching middle schoolers that enslaved people developed skills in their servitude and benefited them. So she was questioning, how can someone suggest that in the midst of these atrocities, those are her words, that there was any benefit to being subjected to this level of dehumanization. And so some advocates now are saying these monuments like Till's are those so important to preserve this black history.
Nguyen, thanks so much for the update. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Take care.
You're listening to John Howell Essential Cuts on 890 WLS.
Now, the target demographic, commercial real estate, and those involved in it will certainly get it. Whatever your station in life, and now let's welcome David Roeder, covers business and labor for the Chicago Sun-Times, also classic rock fan, apparently. I love this line, David. Whatever our station in life, many of us can pause and give thanks that we don't own a portfolio of office buildings. How bad is it?
Yes, indeed. It used to be owning these office buildings. It was better than having annuities because you could, sit back and collect income for however many years you wanted to own the buildings, and then probably turn around and sell them at a handsome profit. It was a great deal. But now, yes, the earth is moving under the feet of this business. Maybe in some cases literally. And now I'm going to have that song stuck in my head for the rest of the week.
That's a
John,
good one.
So
Not a bad one to have stuck. I love the reference in the column. You referenced those folks at Northwestern. I talked about this. Said that under the loop, the heat from our activity, the basements, the subway system, everything else, is causing some of the soil to shift and the foundations on some of these older buildings and heavier buildings to sink a little bit. But really, we're not worrying about that imminently. The bigger concern is the fact that the loans are coming due, and those that own the buildings can't pay the loans because the rental income is drying up.
Yes, the whole fundamentals, everything that the valuations used to be based on, that's all changed. Not too many people want to be in huge offices anymore. Everybody is downsizing. They're throwing empty space on the market, and so there's a lot of vacancy out there, and it's coming at a time when landlords don't have the ability anymore to refinance. They might owe more than what the building is worth now, and some of them are choosing to just walk away. It's going to be a very bad situation for a while for the owners of these office buildings. They're going to have to figure out some new uses. The city is nudging them in that direction, trying to get them to consider a residential conversion, which can cost a lot of money. But it's one alternative for some of these older buildings, especially kind of the old classically designed skyscrapers up and down LaSalle Street. When we think of the old LaSalle Street office canyon, that is hurting a bit. So there's going to have to be a lot of changes coming in this market over the next few years.
Didn't they post-pandemic predict, okay, we're going to have 25% drop in valuations? It turns out it's closer to 40%?
Yeah, some of the predictions now are saying, the valuations of these office buildings may be falling 40%. They're upping that gradually every few months. Maybe it'll get even worse than that.
Describe to my listeners, and I think you touched on it, but let's dial down on it. Describe to them what shadow vacancies are. That's basically just subletting, right?
Yeah, subleasing, where the landlord is still getting paid for the space, but the tenant wants to give it up and rent it to somebody else. And there's a record amount of subleasing going on in the downtown market, a lot of it in the suburbs as well. There's some different factors going on in the suburbs, old office parks, kind of, monuments to corporate glory in the past that are now outmoded and might be reused for something else. And in the city, it's more, multi-tenant office buildings that are struggling. Now, there can be some turnarounds, and I mentioned it in the column that I wrote that the old post office is now, it's a cool place to be. Corporations decided it was a great headquarters space, but wow, if you go back 20 years ago, nobody knew what to do with that thing. It was like this monstrosity crossing the Eisenhower Expressway, and it was literally falling apart. Nobody knew what they could make of it.
But they would. That was all Jamie Dimon committing, right? That was Morgan Chase.
That was a big, $1 billion commitment from Jamie Dimon, J.P. Morgan Chase, and the owners there. They turned it around and they made it very stylish.
But that's kind of a one-off, isn't it? We're talking about David Roeder. He covers business and labor for the Chicago Sun-Times. There's other buildings that are in real trouble, heading for foreclosure. It could be 30 North LaSalle, the Civic Opera Building. That's Sam. What was his name? He went to jail, didn't he, for fraud? The guy that built that, Sam.
Samuel Insult. Yeah.
And, and then 175 West Jackson, they're cooked, aren't they?
A lot of them are in really bad shape. It'll get to the point where there have to be new owners who come in who are able to readjust. They get the debt wiped out, and then maybe they can start cutting deals and doing some renovations to get people back in there. But it, in many cases, will be a tough sell. Now, for the Central Loop, it's important to remember Google is making a big investment in the old Thompson Center, and the state of Illinois is keeping a lot of employees there on LaSalle Street. So that will be a bit of a shot in the arm over the next couple of years.
Nationally, though, with this, we've talked about this. I think you and I talked about this when the economy came back after the pandemic. We said there's still a big dark cloud over the horizon that we're going to have to deal with, and that's commercial real estate. Overall, when you look at this nationally, just as we're getting the soft landing with inflation coming down and the job market is very, very brisk and good, and people are still working, you're paying a lot more for hamburgers, but that notwithstanding, how will this, when it lands, and it's going to land not only here in Chicago but nationwide, how will it affect the economy? Is it enough to really forestall it or even put it into a depression? I mean, a recession?
It could have some pretty deep effects because remember, if your central business district is hurting, there are fewer people going to those stores. There are fewer people riding the trains and so forth. So there will be a lot of other operations that can be hit. Hopefully, it's something that can readjust and recover over time. They're doing some interesting things downtown with the Sundays on State program. That's getting a lot of activity down there again. I was down.
Too. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I stayed downtown Thursday night for a party, and the whole place was hopping. It was over Randolph and Michigan in that territory at Carlucci's, his place on Randolph. But I walked to and from. I mean, the city was alive, but that doesn't mean commercial real estate is coming back. I talked before your segment, before the news here, about how people are coming back downtown, but not these mid-level employees they're choosing to work from home 1 or 2, maybe 3 days a week, and they're not coming back downtown. So commercial real estate still has a ways to go. David, I have to leave it there for our conversation, but thanks so much, sir. We'll read some more in tomorrow's Sun-Times. Sure, great. Thanks very much, John. Take care.
This is John Howell, Essential Cuts on 890 WLS.
All right, the Major League Baseball trade deadline is a week from today, so who are the buyers and who are the sellers? All but 5 teams are within 10 games of a playoff spot. So the A's, the Royals, the Nationals, the Rockies, and the White Sox are the only undeniable sellers. Some high payroll teams that you'd expect to spend this time of year have dropped off, the Mets and the Padres. Surprise teams with smaller payrolls, Baltimore and the Diamondbacks, have emerged. The Athletics' Ken Rosenthal, a fine columnist, wrote, "This is one of the stranger buildups to the trade deadline I can remember. The sport is essentially upside down. You have about 23 pretty good players potentially available." Now, with that in mind, the White Sox and the Cubs meet for the first time this season tonight at Guaranteed Rate Field. Let's welcome Bret Longball Austin, WLS Defacto Sports Director, to discuss both the Cubs and the White Sox. Before we get to you, Bret, I want to give credit where credit is due. This is a great line written by Scott Greger, Daily Herald writer, who wrote this column today. As for the excitement level heading in to the Crosstown Classic, or what used to be called the Crosstown Classic here, as for the excitement level heading in, this one is right up there with deciding between synthetic or conventional at your next oil change. The misery index has been pretty high all season on both sides of town. That doesn't mean the city rivals are passengers on the same sinking ship. Thank you, Scott. Now to Bret Gogoel. Let's start with the Cubs. They're hot right now. Do they sell or hold?
I'm going to tell you the same thing I said last week, and I think it really comes down to the last minute for them. They're 7 games out right now, and depending on what they do in the next 6 days before the August 1st trade deadline, I think if they're 3 to 4, maybe even 5 games out, I could see them being even a small buyer at that point. But anything more than that, and they're going to be really tempted to sell off at least a couple of pieces. I think it'll be really hard to sell to the team and the fan base, especially trading Cody Bellinger. The guy has absolutely resurrected his career on the North Side this year after being miserable with the Dodgers after winning an MVP. And he's somebody that fans really want to be signed long-term after he's been able to do this. Marcus Stroman, I could see being more likely to be traded. Same thing with Kyle Hendricks, who starts tonight, because they're a little bit older. Marcus Stroman has said he wants to return to the Cubs. He's 31, but he's been very up and down his entire career. So those are possibilities that could be sold, but I don't think that they know yet what they're going to do, which is unfortunate when you're 6 days away from the deadline.
I would assume that Rick Hahn knows what he's going to do. The White Sox are 12.5 back, and no hope for them this year. This is a team that was built for the playoffs, if not the World Series. Is it time just to sell off and start again?
I think he's going to be hard-pressed to somehow keep his job, which he's continued to do if he does sell off everything. And as a White Sox fan, I don't want him in charge of a rebuild. We've already seen him try, and now you can say pretty fairly fail dramatically at rebuilding the team because they're just not set up in a way that allows them to draft and develop players. So I don't want Rick Hahn in charge of the next rebuild if that's what's going to happen. I think what's more likely for them is the retool, where maybe they trade the players who aren't going to be around next year. It includes Lucas Giolito, Lance Lynn. I don't think they'd pick up his option at the end of the year because he's been miserable this year, but Lucas Giolito's definitely gone at the end of the year. The White Sox won't spend the money to re-sign him. I think it's less likely you see somebody like Dylan Cisco, even though he would be the big ticket item. He's the one that could get a legitimately good return for the team if he went. So I think for Rick Hahn's personal interests, he might be more tempted to give it one more go next year. And if it doesn't work, then you tear it all down to the studs.
Do you read Rick Morrissey in the Sun-Times?
I do.
Reading from his column over the weekend. Professional sports is an industry in which executives are almost always fired for failure. But the Sox and Bulls are owned by Jerry Reinsdorf. They're the two franchises in pro sports that don't fire executives for failure. This is about an owner who thinks he's George Bailey and his franchise is a building and loan. The Sox have finished above 500 only twice in Rick Hahn's 11 years as general manager. Fire him, right? Absolutely not. Banker Jerry tells the agitated Bedford Falls crowd, and again, this is from Rick Morrissey, "You're thinking of this place all wrong, as if I had the money back in a safe. The money's not here. Your money is in Rick Hahn's home, right next to yours, and in Kenny Williams' house, the way it used to be in John Paxton's house, and 100 others. Why, you're lending them the money to build, and then they're going to pay it back the best they can. Now, what are you going to do, foreclose on them?" And that's a pretty witty column.
It is. But, if somebody's not paying you rent or whatever they owe you, which would be wins and playoff series and ideally a World Series or an NBA championship, you foreclose on them and you fire them. There's no reason. I was really excited when Rick Hahn took over after Kenny because it seemed like he was kind of an analytically focused mind. But the man hasn't won a playoff series in 11 years. They've had 2 seasons with an over 500 record. That's just bad. There's no way around it. There's no other situation in any other professional sport that Rick Hahn would still have a job. It's one of those he's got to know where the bodies are buried kind of scenarios.
I texted, where's that coming from? Oh, is that one of the the TV just came back on. We paid our bill. That TV just popped on in here. Hold on one second. Fletcher, can you come in here, please, and mute this television for me? The thing's been off for 3 or 4 weeks. The TV just came back on.
Give it a few more minutes. It'll probably turn back off.
Yeah. Well, it's odd here, not to get too far off subject, is these 2 monitors work fine.
Yeah.
But that one comes and goes intermittently. Fletch, I need you. Come in here.
Oh, you were being serious. You're actually asking the intern to come in there and mute the television.
Yeah, I am. I can't get to it right now.
Oh, okay.
He's live on air.
Yeah.
How is he supposed to hit mute?
I don't even know
with
where
all
the
these other buttons that he hits.
But the TV sound is never on.
Go pull the cord out of that TV over there. Pull the cord out of the
Why
outlet.
is that the option instead of just muting it with the remote?
We can't find the remote.
Any remote. This one working right. This one right next to me. Should
All right, then
ideally
you shut it off.
mute it if I even can reach it from here.
It's so aggravating.
The
All right, you know how to
remote
do
was
that?
right at mic 2, Brett.
Okay,
That's where it was.
gotta-
It was hidden.
You have to go to monitor 1. Okay. All right, that's fine. You muted it. All right, leave it. It's fine. Great.
I think
Nice
I
job.
muted it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Crisis averted, America. Let me just finish here.
Yeah.
Rick Morrissey, I wrote him, I texted him yesterday. I said, I spit up my coffee when I read the George Bailey, Jerry Reinsdorf bit. I believe we do have a comment here from, I believe this is Jerry Reinsdorf. Chair?
Now, we can get through this thing all right. We've got to stick together, though. We've got to have faith in each other.
But, Jerry, where's the money?
The money's not here.
Well, where is it?
Now, just remember that this thing isn't as black as it appeared.
Yes, it is.
Well, he also got in a little bit of heat a few months ago when he spoke at that executive symposium and basically said, all you got to do is finish in second place and keep your fans interested. Well, you're not even doing that now.
It's a beautiful facility, and the food is terrific.
Yeah, and the beer's great.
And the weather's great.
Yeah.
Go down there.
Everything but the baseball team is great on the south side.
You're watching professional sports.
Yeah.
Some years they're great, some years they're not great, but it's the great American pastime, or supposedly it's a great American pastime. Go enjoy the baseball game tonight at 35th and Billvick Drive, and let us know what you think.
You're listening to John Howell, Essential Cuts on 890 WLS.
I think I say this every day, or most days. I subscribe to all the newspapers, national papers, all the papers here locally. Not so much for the news anymore because that's on my phone, but for the columnists. And Rick Kogan's one of my favorites. And he wrote a piece in the Chicago Tribune, Return with Us and Mike Royko to the beer tasting days of old. Mike Royko, we're trying to figure out, and we'll ask this question of Rick in just a second. 50 years ago this July, he had some sort of beer tasting contest. He wrote about it in his column, which was great, like all of his columns. We're not sure if, in fact, it took place at the legendary Billy Goat. Here's Mike Royko from years ago talking about the famous Lower Michigan Tavern.
I've had magazine pieces done on me who like, they always say, well, they always want me to go pose for a picture in Billy Goat's Tavern because it's a visual thing. Television people say, let's conduct the interview in Billy Goat's Tavern. It doesn't matter if I haven't been in a tavern in 2 months or in Billy Goat's for 2 months. They want to go down there. That's okay. It really doesn't affect what my main concern, which is what winds up in my column.
Well, they are going to recreate this event this Sunday, 50 years, and it's going to be at the Old Town Ale House, which is just on North Avenue, just west of Wells. Let's welcome a man who has almost as deep a voice as Mike Royko, Rick Kogan, back to WLS. Rick, how are you, sir?
I'm good, but that's what smoking and drinking for decades will do to a guy's voice. It did it to Mike's and it sent it to mine. It's always, I love writing about Mike. And, one of the amazing things, John, is, Mike's been dead for, 25 years. And his reputation and I think his image and his legacy is still so strong that when this resurrected beer contest was announced on a website by one of the people sponsoring the thing, it sold out in less than an hour.
Yeah.
He's the Beyonce of the afterlife, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really truly amazing. It just shows what it was to be a newspaper columnist of that rank when newspapers were newspapers.
Yeah. Such a good. I think of Chicago writers. I think of Royko, and I think of Farrell, and I think of you also mentioned Nelson Algren. I love Nelson Algren. I quote him quite often. So the Old Town Ale House, I know that there's I think a picture of Royko there, but did he haunt that place as well?
I don't think he really haunted it. He was, if there were a certain number of bars in the great drinking days of the newspapers. The Billy Goat was one.
Ricardo's
was another at the corner of Brush and Hubbard.
Miller's Pub.
O'Rourke's.
Yeah, O'Rourke's.
Sort of Miller's Pub, sort of. But because none of us like to walk into the Loop for some strange reason. We wanted to stand on the north side of the river. There was O'Rourke's, which was on North Avenue, just a little west of where the Ale House is. And the Ale House, because the Ale House was then and now a 4 a.m. Bar.
Mm-hmm.
Those were many of the people called it the Iron Triangle and the Bermuda Triangle, because you could get pretty lost if you hit all three places in the same night.
So what? Now, I know this event is sold out, which is a real shame. But you've gone to the Newberry Library, pulled some memorabilia or readings from Mike Royko out of there, from Royko's work, and an actor, Gary Houston, is going to replicate some of that. I think you're going to do some of this. And so Royko's son, Sam, who ran for city council.
Alderman.
Alderman, right? And Andy Shaw is going to be there, former TV reporter, and is a very grace-like, or I should, swan-like neck will be there. So he's great.
He's also a big fan of the Ale House, I'll tell you that.
So what did we learn about this 50 years ago? What did he call all-American beers swill? That doesn't seem very Royko-esque.
More or less he did. I mean, Mike grew up, above a tavern. He was hanging around his dad's tavern when he was a young man. I mean, he knew booze, and if Mike called American beer swill, he knew what he was talking about. I mean, he was not a booster of Budweiser and Schlitz and some of the others that made the bottom of the initial test. But the great thing about this, there were maybe 11 judges in the original contest. I talked to one of them, a guy named Don DeBatt, who was a colleague of Mike's at the Daily News and a pretty good softball player on the Daily News team. And, of course, Don told me, well, yeah, it was at the – I said, where was it, for God's sake? Well, it was at the Goat. Of course it was at the Goat. Then he would call me back an hour later and go, maybe it was some – then I heard from someone else doing my reporting. Someone called me and said, yeah, I wasn't there. But my husband was there, and you know where it was? I go, no, that's what I'm trying to find out. It was at the top floor bar of the Hancock building. And I go, that seems so wrong.
That seems off.
That seems so wrong.
Yeah, I doubt it.
Finally, in my maybe the last of my investigative reporting skills, I found out from Mike's eldest son, David Royko, that it was held at Mike's house in Edgebrook at the time, in the backyard of Mike's house. And I go, David, how old were you then? He goes, Rick, I was either 12 or 13, but the reason I remember is I was serving the beer, and I fell down the stairs and spilled the beer, and a TV camera was there. And so I was on TV in an embarrassing early teen moment of spilling the beer.
Does any of that footage exist? Does any of that exist?
I've tried. No, boy, would that be something.
And what Paul DeRica, he started this 50-year anniversary deal. He's the director, and at the Chicago History Museum, he's going to corral some Royko memorabilia or presentation materials for this event as well, isn't he?
Yeah, he was at, Judy Royko, Mike's widow, gave, and Mike's son, Sam, gave all of Mike's paper and memorabilia to the Newberry Library. They donated it to the Newberry Library. Paul DeRica was still there at the time, and he wisely initiated what will be next summer a massive kind of Mike Royko exhibition at the Newberry. Right. And he moved over to the Chicago History Museum, and he couldn't shake it. He could not shake the fact that he came across some of Mike's papers, not just columns, but some of his organizational papers about this first beer test, and talked to a professor named Bill Savage and to Liz Garibay, who runs the Museum, and they decided to resurrect it. I mean, it's going to be awfully crowded because the Ale House is not big, but it sold out very fast. And I also think, in a surprise, I think Mike's grandson, the son of David Royko, the aforementioned underage server at the outdoor first test, is also planning to be there. And I haven't seen Jake in a long time, so that'll be good. And who knows? I mean, the nature of beer, as you well know, in this town has changed dramatically. These are going to be some craft beers.
Who won the original contest 50 years ago? Was there a winner? Do we remember the name of the beer that won?
Yeah, I'll give it to you in 2 seconds. I'm just looking up. It was again, I'm not going to try any of these things because I don't like beer. Mike was not. The other thing about Mike was not a big beer drinker either. He was
the brown stuff.
Yes, coming out on top in the initial contest was Wurzburger from Germany, followed by Bass Ale.
Ooh, both good ones.
Bottom, yeah, but on the bottom were from the third to the last down, Old Milwaukee, Schlitz, and Budweiser. And, the funny thing is, Mike also started a few years after this, the famous Rib Fest. I'm surprised that he didn't wind up doing this every year, frankly, because it really got a lot of response in the paper and people, of course, arguing and giving their own 2 cents about what beers were the best. But he also, Mike was good with contests. He had the world's ugliest dog contest.
Yeah, he was great. He was so good.
Everybody
read Royko, not just here, but I mean nationally too. So he's like Jimmy Breslin. Jimmy Breslin, Royko, maybe one or two others. Rick, it was nice seeing you the other night. I did notice you were not drinking beer, and it was great catching up with you.
Yes, you too. It's always good to see you, and it's always good to talk to you, too. You run a good radio show.
Thank you, sir. Coming from you, that means a lot.
You're very welcome.
Anyway, I know that I'll read about this, Monday?
Well, but I'll have probably Tuesday, given the weird deadlines of the of the Tribune. But you'll like a story that will probably be online tomorrow. There has been discovered in the home of a former accordion player a Cubs song that'll be debuted on August 2nd at Gallagher Way, right next to Wrigley Field. It's a charming story about a guy who worked maybe 50 years as a streets and sand guy, but was a very, very moonlit as a very, very popular accordion player. And the song is a good song, John.
Okay, good. I can't wait. I'll read about it tomorrow. Do you remember Art Van Dam? Art Van Dam is a terrific player here in town. Great jazz accordionist.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Art Van Dam.
It's sometimes good to be old because we remember these things.
I can't remember what I had for lunch today, but I can remember Art Van Dam.
Same here, man.
All right. Thanks, Rick. I'll talk to you again.
Good to talk to you.
Enjoy the event. I wish I could be there. Enjoy the event this weekend.
Give you a full report.
Okay,
Take
terrific.
care.
John Howell, Essential Cuts. Check back every weekday for another episode of John Howell, Essential Cuts on 890 WLS.